Okay, as advertised, Dougie Mack back on the show. Welcome back, my friend. Greetings up there in the Great White North. Happy holidays to you and yours, my friend. The ball does not stop. It continues to go along. You still crank out the content. You got a bunch of articles out, including the year review in review and a preview of the upcoming transfer window. Let's look a little back in terms of your year in review. Give me a couple of things that stood out to you either on or off the field that you wrote about when it comes to this crazy soccer world that we cover.
Yeah, Lex, same to you. Great to see you as always. We thought 2023 was a crazy year for the U.S. men's national team, the way it started with all the off-field drama. Greg Berhalter getting rehired as coach halfway through the year. And 2024 we thought couldn't possibly be as chaotic, as drama filled, and of course it was. And really, the sort of the theme of the article was that there were some warning signs that things weren't going well very early on. You don't put stock in a January friendly, but the U.S. lost to Slovenia. They go into the Nations League in March, get very, very lucky to beat Jamaica in the Nations League semifinal. And then when they beat Mexico in the final, you sort of think that, you forget that game against Jamaica happened. But in hindsight, I think that's where the alarm bells were going off. And then we got another warning right before the Copa America with that loss to Colombia. So there were some warning signs that the Copa America maybe wasn't going to go well. Obviously, that happened, and it led to a year of tremendous change. Berhalter out, Mauricio Pochettino in, and I think the U.S. finishes the year with a sense of optimism. They win their last two games of the year, including on the road in Jamaica, and it was an improvement from Pochettino's first window. Only two camps, but you could see that the team was better the second window than the first, and I think that that's a really good sign heading into what we know is going to be a really important 2025 for the U.S. men's national team.
Doug, the January transfer window is upon us. One of the players you mentioned in your piece is Jedi Robinson. He's been linked to big clubs in England like Liverpool and Manchester City. And until recently, I would have thought moving to those clubs, he would risk being a backup. But do you think he's progressed to the point now where he's viewed as a starter even for clubs at that level?
I don't think there's any question, Mosse. If a team like Liverpool is going to come in and drop the sort of money that it's going to take to get him from Fulham, Jedi signed a 5-year contract extension last year, or at the beginning of last season, I think I should say. Then there's no question. I mean, we're talking about a guy who is, for my money, the best left back in the Premier League, maybe the best fullback in the Premier League. He had another assist in Fulham's most recent match. He's leading the entire all defenders in assists in the Premier League. And I think he's proved that he's ready for that next step. I remember speaking to him over the summer. He said he wants to play Champions League football. Obviously, he would have that chance at a club like Liverpool. So I think he's ready to go. It's really a question of whether Fulham is willing to sell him in January. But as I wrote, either way, this is the last look we're getting at Antonee Robinson at Fulham, whether he goes in January, whether he goes at the end of the season. I would be stunned if he's not at a major club this time next year.
What are we looking at number wise in terms of Jedi? Where do you think he values right now?
I mean, the number that pops in my head, Lex, is that kind of 20 million mark. Whether it's euros or dollars or maybe a little bit less pounds. But I think he's that level of player at this stage. And who knows? The money in England is crazy, as we know, but he's going to earn his agent a lot of money with that next transfer. I don't think there's any question about that.
Well, let's stick with some stock up types of players, and we'll get to the stock down and some of the the problems and the red flags going on for some players here. Ricardo Pepi, right now playing great certainly for country and coming in and kind of not grabbing it with both hands yet, but at least with one hand when it comes to that striker position that still remains open as far as I'm concerned. But he's done some really good things. And then I think from a club perspective has done pretty much everything that is asked of him in terms of making it difficult and coming on as a substituting and scoring goals. But do you see a move, and we've talked about him in terms of moves a lot, do you see a move here in the near future when it comes to January, or is this much more of a summer type of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, much like Jedi, I think it's a case where if there was an opportunity to come along in January, there would be no question Ricardo Pepi would take it if it made sense, if it got him more playing time. I mean, I think that's what he said consistently. He's scoring whenever he plays, but he wants to play. He wants to start. He's behind Luuk de Jong still at PSV. He's getting more minutes, so that's a good sign. But I think PSV wants to keep him. I think they see that he is the successor to Luke Young, who's getting up in years. He's not going to be able to man that position forever. So it's really a question of how patient is Pepe willing to be. He has been patient, and he wants to play more. So will he get to play more the second half of the season? There's still some Champions League games for PSV. I think he will. I think they're throwing him a bone a little bit in terms of giving him some starts now that he didn't get last year. But he is under contract, and PSV doesn't have to sell him. So really, that's again, it comes down to what the club wants to do. But I think again, if Pepe had the opportunity, he'd be gone tomorrow. He wants to play.
You think Pepe or Jedi? If you had to pick one in terms of making the move in January, which one?
It's a tough question. I've thought a lot about it actually coming into the show. I would say they're probably 50-50. I don't want to sit on the fence, but gun to my head, I would say Jedi is the more likely of the two.
Got it. Mosse?
Doug, another center forward, Brandon Vasquez, didn't actually have a great apertura, but his stock is still pretty high in this region. Could a return to MLS be in the cards for him?
Yeah, I mean, Tom Bogert, our friend who we know well, reported earlier this month that there were several MLS teams interested in Vasquez, and he's a proven scorer in MLS. I mean, just a couple of years ago, the joint top scoring American in the league. Didn't have as great a year in 2023, but he's a proven commodity. And like you said, he started off very well at Monterrey, but the starts dried up towards the end of the year. He did start one leg of the Apertura final, but the goals dried up as well. So it could be a guy that's looking for a move, and certainly a lot of MLS teams could use a goal scorer as good in MLS as Brandon Vasquez has proven to be.
When it comes to some of these players that are not playing, the likes of Chris Richards and Matt Turner, and even to a certain extent Gio Reyna, although he's had a really good run here the last couple of weeks, what's on their radar? And you mentioned briefly there about MLS, and how much does MLS, do you think, factor into some of these players in terms of the palette of potential destinations if and when they go?
Well, I think it's always there as a fallback, and not to paint the MLS in that brush, but it is there. Like, guys know they can play if they absolutely have to. We saw, you mentioned on the last show, Michael Bradley came back before World Cup because he knew he's going to get playing time in Toronto. He wasn't getting it at Roma. So it's an option for guys, and I think it's an option primarily because Mauricio Pochettino, the U.S. coach, has said it is an option. He's gonna, he doesn't care where guys are playing. Every time he's asked, he said, well, Lionel Messi's the best player in the world. He's from Argentina, so he's obviously a little bit biased. But he says, if Messi's playing in MLS, then why can't any of my players play in MLS? So I think that's a good thing. Matt Turner's in a really interesting situation because he's on a year-long loan, season-long loan to Palace from Nottingham Forest, and every team needs a good number 2 goalkeeper. Dean Henderson, obviously the number 1 at Palace. So is he really going to leave in January? I don't think so. It's not the worst thing in the world, given that there's not a ton of competition behind him for the national team. And there's only one window between now and June, and that's the Nations League. And the last 2 Nations League, Matt Turner was in goal, and the U.S. managed to win that tournament, even though he wasn't playing for his club at the time. So I would think Matt Turner will stick it out for the rest of the year at Palace. But he's a guy that he has to move before the 2026 World Cup to somewhere where he's going to play. And I know he likes being in the Premier League. He's now with his 3rd team in the Premier League, but that might mean dropping down a division, whether that's into the Championship or, if he goes to Belgium or the Netherlands or Germany or MLS, he has to find somewhere where he's going to play in the lead up to the World Cup in 2026.
Doug, Alexi mentioned Gio Reyna. He started a couple of games in a row against Barcelona and Hoffenheim, actually scored a nice goal against Hoffenheim, but then back on the bench against Wolfsburg. Do you think starting those 2 games was enough for him to feel like he's part of the mix there and for him to stick it out at Dortmund the rest of the season?
I can't see him leaving in January, Mosse. I think we all know he went on loan last year, didn't work out well for him, worked out well for Dortmund. They get to the Champions League final before him. They're a good team. There's a lot of competition there, but the fact that he's gotten a couple of starts and he's scored is encouraging. I think that, you have to think that in going into 2025, second half of the season, now that he's healthy, if he can build on that, that would be huge for him to get a run at games, and obviously huge for the national team as well. But yeah, I'd be surprised if he moves in January. I think he'll be there, and I think he should stay. I know you were a proponent of him staying last year, so I think you'll get your wish this year, Mosse.
Finishing up here, and by the way, you should definitely go read Doug's story, and there's a whole lot more about players and gets into a whole lot more detail. But if there is a American player out there who needs a move, who needs it the most in terms of some of the players that we've talked about?
It's a good question. I would have said maybe Chris Richards a couple of weeks ago, but he did start that game against Arsenal. He went back to the bench, came on as a sub, and then he started in Palace's most recent game, which they won. But for every player, it's about playing. There's a few guys that were not mentioned in my article that I think I should mention quick, because I think perhaps some of the most likely guys to move are not guys that have been in regularly and might want to make a move to catch Pochettino's attention. One guy that comes to mind is Lenny Maloney. He came in under Berhalter. He's in the second year as a starter in the Bundesliga with Heidenheim. He turned down a contract extension with Heidenheim, which means that he's out of contract at the end of the season. So he's definitely going to be gone by June, and maybe even sooner than that. Heidenheim in a relegation dogfight. I think a team that's always going to be in that sort of situation. A team that he helped get promoted a few years ago. They're 17th now, the third from bottom in that league at the moment. So I think Maloney's looking at a step up to maybe a mid-table or better Bundesliga team, and hopefully can get himself back into the national team under the new coach.
Doug, Stu Holden said recently on this pod that Ricardo Pepi should move to Serie A. He didn't specify a team, he just said Serie A. Do you buy in general that Serie A has usurped the Bundesliga and the Premier League as the go-to destination for Americans, that when in doubt they should look to go to that league now?
It's certainly become more of a viable option. But it's a little bit different than some of the other leagues you mentioned, because I think you saw typically younger players going to the Bundesliga or going to the Eredivisie and trying to work their way up. For me, Serie A is a little bit more mature of a league. It's a bit better of a league than it has been in years. We watch it all the time now with all the Americans in there. And when you look at the sort of Americans that are there, for the most part, certainly with the big clubs, they're starters. They're, it's guys that are established. They're not necessarily looking at as a step to get somewhere else. And I still think that U.S. players, when they go to Germany, when they go to the Netherlands, they're looking at a chance to move up to the Premier League, or now Serie A. I mean, it used to be all about the Premier League. That's where everyone wanted to go. That's where you get the most money. That's where there's the most exposure. It's the most competitive league in the world. But certainly, given the success that Christian Pulisic has had, Weston McKennie, Tim Weah, Yunus Musa in that league, I think you're going to start to see more Americans going there. And there are some guys that are making a case there. Gianluca Busio getting back to Serie A. Now he's back with the national team as well. So, when other players see that, the coach is paying attention and calling in players that aren't necessarily on the top teams, that's always going to catch guys' attention. And it's certainly a viable landing spot for Americans now, a lot more than it had been for a long time. So it's great to see.
Well, let's finish it up here. And you mentioned Pochettino and call-ups and all that kind of stuff. We're a year and a half away from the 26 World Cup, which is amazing to think. We have what traditionally has been, Camp Cupcake or whatever you want. We have games coming up in against Venezuela in Fort Lauderdale and against Costa Rica in Orlando. But obviously, a camp in January is not going to have a lot of the players that will feature. What are you hearing about that camp? And then as this challenge of getting quality competition over the next year and a half happens, what are you hearing from a U.S. national team perspective as to how this next year and a half is going to look?
Yeah, for me, January camp is always interesting. Everyone likes to deride it as Camp Cupcake and make fun of it, and that's fine. But as we know, guys, there's always one or two players from those camps that end up becoming staples on the national team. Stu Holden was one. There's a list somewhere someone compiled. I think it was Jeff Crandall at U.S. Soccer, of all the guys that have gotten their first or second cap for the U.S. squad, senior cap during a January window. And it's a who's who of national team greats: Landon Donovan, Josie Altidore, Clint Dempsey. We saw Matt Turner use a January camp to propel himself into a starting spot at a World Cup not too long ago. So Similar camp, obviously, almost exclusively MLS based. I think there might be one or two players that are a surprise from outside of the domestic league. We're looking at around 28 or so players, somewhere between the normal 25, 26, and 30. And yeah, good opportunity for players to MLS players to work with the coaching staff for an extended period of time. There'll be about 10 or 12, I think 14 days in total. The players will report on the 7th. Camp begins on January 8th. 2 games, as you mentioned, on January 18th and 22nd. So it's very rare as a national team that you get that much time in front of the coach. And if you perform well, I think I'm sure there'll be a couple of guys from January camp on that March roster for Nations League that impress Mauricio Pochettino. Beyond that, we know we have a Gold Cup in the summer. There's going to be at least 2 pre-Gold Cup friendlies. I'm told that the opponents and venues are not sorted out for that. Nothing's been finalized. I know the U.S. was trying to schedule England to play against them in June in Philadelphia, but not sure that's happening. England has a World Cup qualifier that same window. They would need FIFA permission to come over to the U.S. to leave their confederation and play a friendly in another one. So I don't know that that's going to happen. But it is complicated by the fact that a lot of teams are in World Cup qualifying in that June window. But I know the goal is to get the best competition possible to go into the Gold Cup. So we'll have to see who those opponents are. But lots of games. There's going to be lots to talk about in 2025 for sure.
Well, good. I mean, I hope there is as much to talk about in 2025 and obviously leading up to 2026. And you will be there to document it all and talk about it all. We always appreciate when you come on. Again, Doug McIntyre's articles are out right now, whether it's the year in review that is 2024 and a look back at all the crazy things that happened on and off the field, or as we said, this preview of this transfer window coming up and how it affects Americans going forward. My friend, go back to work. Hope to see you in person at some point soon. And we always thank you for coming on the State of the Union.
Thanks for having me, guys. Happy New Year to both of you, and look forward to a great New Year for all of us.
To you too. You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops twice a week right here on my very own YouTube page. The only way to stay up to date is to hit that subscribe button down below. Size the day, and see you soon.